Chapter 9. David D. Burns. The following are quotes from his 1980 book, Feeling Good. If you're willing to invest a little time in yourself, you can learn to master your moods more effectively, just as an athlete who participates in a daily conditioning program can develop greater endurance and strength. What is the key to releasing yourself from your emotional prison? Simply this: your thoughts create your emotions. Therefore, your emotions cannot prove that your thoughts are accurate. Unpleasant feelings merely indicate that you are thinking something negative and believing it. Your emotions follow your thoughts just as surely as baby ducks follow their mother. In a nutshell, feelings are not facts. You can change your feelings by changing your thinking. Books in a similar vein. Nathaniel Branden's The Psychology of Self-Esteem. Albert Ellis and Robert A. Harper's A Guide to Rational Living. Martin Seligman's Authentic Happiness. William Styron's Darkness Visible. And Robert E. Thayer's The Origin of Everyday Moods. Consider this statistic. In the United States, 5.3% of the population will, at any given time, have depression, and the lifetime risk is 7 to 8% in adults, higher for women. 40 years ago, the mean age for onset of depression was 29.5. Today, it is halved to 14.5 years. And though rates differ around the developed world, the incidence of depressive illness has risen dramatically since 1900. Prior to the 1980s, David Burns writes, depression had been the cancer of the psychological world, widespread but difficult to treat, and the taboos associated with it made the problem worse for most people. As with cancer, finding a cure had been its holy grail. Everything from Freudian psychoanalysis to shock treatment was applied to the problem, with not very good results. Burns helped to establish a new method of treatment, cognitive therapy, and Feeling Good, the new mood therapy, is his attempt to explain how it works and why it is different. The book has been a bestseller because it was the first to tell the general public about cognitive therapy, and also because it is a surprisingly enjoyable and useful read for the non-depressed, providing possibly life-changing insights into how our thoughts and emotions interact. The Cognitive Way. In his work at the University of Pennsylvania as a psychiatric resident, Burns collaborated with pioneering cognitive psychologist Aaron T. Beck, who believed that most depression or anxiety was simply a result of illogical or negative thinking. He noted the remarkable contrast between how the depressed person feels, that they are a loser or that their life has gone horribly wrong, and the actual conditions of their life, which are often high in achievement. Beck's conclusion was that depression, therefore, had to be based on problems in thinking. By straightening out one's twisted thoughts, one could get back to normal. Beck's 3 principles of cognitive therapy were: 1. All our emotions are generated by our cognitions, or thoughts. How we feel at any given moment is due to what we are thinking about. 2. Depression is the constant thinking of negative thoughts. And 3. The majority of negative thoughts that cause us emotional turmoil are plain wrong, or at least distortions of the truth, but we accept them without question. For Burns, this sounded a little too obvious and simple, but when he actually tried Beck's new talking treatment for depression called cognitive therapy, he was amazed at how many of his chronic patients were relieved of their destructive feelings. People who had been suicidal a couple of weeks earlier now looked forward to rebuilding their lives. Seeing through black magic. Cognitive therapy's revolutionary idea is that depression is not an emotional disorder. The bad feelings we have in depression all stem from negative thoughts. Therefore, treatment must be about challenging and changing those thoughts. Burns lists 10 cognitive distortions, such as all-or-nothing thinking, overgeneralization, disqualifying the positive, jumping to conclusions, and giving ourselves labels. By understanding these distortions, we are led to the awareness that Feelings aren't facts. They are only mirrors of our thoughts. If that is true, should we trust our feelings? They seem valid, the truth, but as Burns points out, it is like trusting the funny mirrors we see in amusement parks to be an accurate reflection of ourselves. He notes, unpleasant feelings merely indicate that you are thinking something negative and believing it. This is why, he suggests, depression is such a powerful form of black magic. Because thoughts come before emotions, our emotions don't prove anything about the accuracy of our thoughts. Feelings are not special at all, particularly when based on distortions. Burns asks the question, when we are in a great mood, do our good feelings determine what we are worth? If not, how can we say that the feelings we have when feeling blue do determine our worth? Burns is not saying that all emotions are distortions. When we experience real sadness or joy, for instance, these are healthy and normal reactions. Genuine sadness, say at the loss of a relative, is of the soul, whereas depression is always of the mind. It is not an appropriate response to life, but a disease of wrong, circular thinking. Creating a new self-image. Burns notes the catch-22 nature of depression. The worse we feel, the more distorted our thoughts become, and this thinking plunges us even lower into black feelings about ourselves. Nearly all his patients considered that their situation was hopeless. They really believed that they were bad people, and the conversations they had with themselves were like a broken record of self-blame and self-deprecation. Depressed people feel wretched even when they are loved, have a family, have good jobs, and so on. We can have everything, but if self-love and self-worth have fled, we feel that we are nothing. Cognitive therapists will often be engaged in a spirited back and forth with their patients, trying to point out the silliness or fallacy of their assertions. Eventually, patients learn to challenge their wrong thoughts on their own, which is the beginning of feeling good about themselves. Final comments. Do the ideas in feeling good really work? Researchers followed two groups of similar patients, one that was given Burns's book to read within a month, and another that was not. Not only did the feeling good group experience a significant amelioration of depressive symptoms compared to the blind group, but their symptoms stayed away. Perhaps the key to the book's efficacy is that we feel we are not being worked on, but given the tools to change ourselves. Prescribing books like Feeling Good to mental illness patients is called bibliotherapy, and Burns's is usually ranked highly by professionals in this respect. Could reading a book really be as effective, or even better than drugs or psychotherapy in helping people with depression? It is certainly worth trying. As Burns himself points out in an introduction to the revised 1999 edition, his book costs about the price of 2 Prozac pills, and there are no side effects. Indeed, the great benefit of cognitive therapy is that there is no need to take any drugs. But in the last chapter of Feeling Good, Burns explains that, for really serious depression, the most effective treatment is a combination of cognitive therapy and antidepressants, the former to improve patients' thinking, the latter to lift their overall mood. Burns points out that the basic idea of cognitive therapy, that our thoughts affect our emotions and mood, not the other way around, goes back a long way. The ancient philosopher Epictetus rested his career on the idea that it is not events that determine your state of mind, but how you decide to feel about the events. This secret is shared by all happy people, yet it is a skill that can be learnt by anyone. David D. Burns. Burns attended Amherst College and received his M.D. from Stanford University. He completed his psychiatric training at the University of Pennsylvania, where he was acting chief of psychiatry of its medical center. In 1975, he won the A.E. Bennett Award for research on brain chemistry from the Society of Biological Psychiatry. Burns has been a visiting scholar at Harvard Medical School and is currently adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Feeling Good has sold over 4 million copies as well as the successful spin-off, The Feeling Good Handbook, Burns has published Love is Never Enough on relationships, 10 Days to Self-Esteem, and When Panic Attacks. Chapter 10. Robert Cialdini. The following are quotes from his 1984 book, Influence. Just what are the factors that cause one person to say yes to another person? And which techniques most effectively use these factors to bring about such compliance? I wonder why it is that a request stated in a certain way will be rejected, while a request that asks for the same favor in a slightly different fashion will be successful. When viewed in this light, the terrible orderliness, the lack of panic, the sense of calm with which these people moved to the vat of poison and to their deaths seems more comprehensible. They hadn't been hypnotized by Jones. They had been convinced, partly by him, but more importantly also by the principle of social proof, that suicide was correct conduct. In a nutshell, know the techniques of psychological influence to avoid becoming their victim. Books in a similar vein. Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear. Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. Eric Hoffer's The True Believer. Stanley Milgram's Obedience to Authority. And Barry Schwartz's The Paradox of Choice. Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, has sold more than 1 million copies and been translated into 20 languages. In his introduction, Robert Cialdini admits he had always been an easy mark for salespeople, peddlers, and fundraisers. It had never been easy for him to just say no when asked to donate money. An experimental social psychologist, he began wondering about the actual techniques that are used to make a person agree to do something when normally they would not be interested. As part of his research, Cialdini answered newspaper ads for various sales training programs so that he could learn at first hand about persuasion and selling techniques. He penetrated advertising, public relations, and fundraising agencies in order to glean the secrets of the psychology of compliance from its professional practitioners. The result is a classic work of both marketing and psychology that shows us why we are so vulnerable to persuasion, in the process telling us much about human nature. Getting our tapes to play. Cialdini starts by discussing the mothering instinct of turkeys. Mother turkeys are very protective, good mothers, but their mothering instinct has been found to be triggered by one thing and one thing only: the cheep cheep sound of their chicks. The polecat is the turkey's natural enemy, and when a mother turkey sees one, she instantly goes into attack mode. She will do so even at the sight of a stuffed version of a polecat. But when the same stuffed polecat is made to make the same cheep cheep sound that her chicks make, something strange happens. The mother turkey becomes a devoted protector of the polecat. How dumb are animals, you may be thinking. Press a button and they act in a certain way, even if those actions are ridiculous. But Cialdini tells us about turkey behavior only to prepare us for the uncomfortable truth about human automatic reactions. We also have our pre-programmed tapes that usually work for us in positive ways. For instance, to ensure our survival without having to think too much. But they can also play to our detriment when we are unaware of the triggers. Cialdini identifies 6 weapons of influence, ways of getting us to act automatically that sidestep our normal rational decision-making processes. Psychologists call these easily triggered behaviors fixed action patterns. Know the trigger, and you can predict with reasonable likelihood how someone will react. A more accurate title for influence could be How to Get Automatic Reactions from People Before They Can Think Rationally About Your Proposition. Cialdini's 6 basic weapons that compliance professionals use to get people to say yes without thinking include reciprocation, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. Always return a favor. The rule of reciprocation, found in every culture, is that we should repay anything given to us, whether it's a gift, an invitation, a compliment, and so on. Do you prefer doing favors for someone you like? Most of us would say yes, but psychological studies have found that the liking factor makes no difference to our sense of obligation to repay a favor. We will feel obligated to individuals or organizations who give us something, even if it is small and even if we don't want it. Cialdini mentions the Hare Krishna movement's tactic of giving flowers or small books to people in the street or in airports. Though most people don't want the flower and often try to give it back, once it is in their hand, they feel an obligation to offer a donation. Straightforward mailings by charity groups usually get a response rate of less than 20%, but this jumps dramatically when the mailing includes a gift, such as stick-on labels printed with the receiver's own name and address. It is not just the obligation to repay that is powerful, but the obligation to receive. Not feeling able to say no, plus our unwillingness to be seen as a person who doesn't repay things, makes us prey to canny marketers. Next time you receive an unsolicited gift, Cialdini warns, be aware of the lack of goodwill involved. That may allow you to receive it and not give anything back while retaining a good conscience. He refers to the famous Watergate break-in that brought down the Nixon presidency. In hindsight, the break-in was stupid, risky, unnecessary — Nixon was set to win the next election anyway — and expensive. But the Republican re-election committee that agreed to do the job only did so to placate one of its more extreme members. G. Gordon Liddy had previously presented two much more outlandish, expensive proposals involving everything from mugging to kidnapping. So when he submitted the idea of a small break-in at Democratic headquarters, the committee felt obligated to say yes. As committee member Jeb Magruder put it later, "We were reluctant to send him away with nothing." Beware the influence of the reciprocation impulse. Being consistent. Human beings like to be consistent. We feel better about something if we are committed to it, and once we are, we do what we can do to justify the decision in our minds. Why are we like this? Part of the reason is social pressure. No one likes someone who seesaws from one idea or state of mind to another. We like to be seen as knowing what we want. This unfortunately creates a gold mine for marketers. They are very aware of the internal pressures against changing our mind, and take full advantage. When charity phone callers ask, "How are you feeling tonight, Mrs.?" 9 times out of 10, we give a positive response. Then, when the caller asks us to give a donation to the unfortunate victims of some disaster or disease, we can't very well suddenly turn mean and grumpy and refuse others who are in a bad way. To be consistent, we feel compelled to offer a donation. Marketers know that if you get someone to offer a small commitment, you have their self-image in your hands. This is why some unscrupulous car dealers offer an initially very low price for a car, which gets us into the showroom. But later, with all the extras, it doesn't turn out to be such a low price at all. Yet by this stage, we feel committed to the purchase. Another trick is for salespeople to get customers to fill out an order form or sales agreement themselves, dramatically reducing the chances of them changing their mind. Public commitments are a strong force. Cialdini notes Emerson's famous quote, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." Especially when you are marketed to, remember your natural tendency to be consistent, and you will find it easier to back out of deals that really aren't that good. Go with your gut feeling about the worth of something before you feel the pressure of consistency, and before you make an initial commitment. Why is canned laughter still added to the recordings of television comedy shows, even when the creative people who make the shows feel insulted by it, and most viewers say they don't like it? Because research shows that viewers find the gags funnier when they hear other people laughing, even if the laughter isn't real. Human beings need the social proof of other people doing something first before they feel comfortable doing it themselves. Cialdini provides a very dark example, the famous case of Catherine Genovese, a woman who was murdered in the streets in Queens, New York City in 1964. Despite the fact that her assailant attacked her 3 times over the course of half an hour before finally killing her, despite the sound of screams and scuffles, and incredibly, even though 38 people saw what was happening, no one stopped to intervene. Was this just a case of the heartlessness of New Yorkers? Possibly, although the witnesses seemed shocked themselves that they had done nothing. Finally, an answer emerged. It seemed that everyone thought someone else would do something, and so no one did anything. A person in dire straits, Cialdini notes, has a greater chance of getting help if only one person is around, rather than a number of people. In a crowd or in a city street, if people see that no one has gone to someone's aid, they feel disinclined to help. We need social proof before we act. Before it became a common notion, Cialdini discussed the idea of copycat suicides. The most famous case of social proof in relation to suicide was the ghastly Jonestown, Guyana incident in 1978, when 910 members of Jim Jones's People's Temple cult took their lives by drinking from vats of poisoned soft drink. How was it possible that so many died so willingly? Most of the cult members had been recruited in San Francisco, and Cialdini suggests that the isolation of being in a foreign country contributed to the natural human tendency to do what others like us are doing. On a lighter note, advertising and marketing are often built around our need for social proof. Often our unwillingness to use a product until plenty of other people are is a useful way of knowing if something is good or not, a shortcut. But marketers get around this easily. Consider the use of testimonials, which, even when done by actors, still have the ability to influence our buying decisions. Not missing out. G.K. Chesterton said, "The way to love anything is to realize that it might be lost." It is human nature to value something more when it is scarce. In fact, we are more motivated by the thought of losing something than we are by gaining something of equal value in its place. Retailers know this, which is why they perpetually scream, "Stocks won't last," to make us fear not getting something we are not sure we wanted anyway. When a film or book has been censored or banned, Cialdini notes, demand for it usually jumps. Whatever we have been told we shouldn't have gains cachet. According to his Romeo and Juliet effect, teenage lovers are much more likely to intensify their relationship if both parents oppose the union, and it is difficult for them to meet. We should be aware of our reaction to scarcity because it affects our ability to think straight. We do silly things like get into bidding wars and then have to pay for something we never budgeted for. We fall victim to salespeople who only have one left in stock, or real estate agents who tell us about a physician and his wife from out of town who are also interested in the house. Be careful to make a cool evaluation of the worth of something, instead of being hijacked by the fear of missing out. Final comments. You will have to get the book to learn about the other 2 categories of influence, liking, and authority. As a clue to the second, Cialdini refers to Stanley Milgram's famous experiments on the tendency of human beings to respect authority, even when the authority figure is highly questionable. Though Cialdini offers many salutary and often scary lessons about our vulnerability to psychological techniques, awareness of them should not necessarily lower our view of human nature. In fact, an appreciation of our automatic behavior patterns may increase the chance that we retain a mind of our own. The best way of reducing the effectiveness of compliance tactics on the unaware is to have more people knowing about them. And in this, influence has done a great public service. One interesting feature of the revised edition of the book is the letters sent in from readers who have witnessed, or been the victim of, the techniques discussed in the book, and wish to share them. Influence is a great primer on how marketers succeed in getting us to buy, but on a deeper level, it is about the way we make decisions. Are your decisions the result of someone trying to pull your mental or emotional strings? Or are you thinking rationally? Robert Cialdini. Cialdini received his Ph.D. in psychology from the University of North Carolina and did postdoctoral training at Columbia University. He has also held posts as a visiting scholar at Ohio State University and Stanford University. He is considered the world's leading authority on the subject of influence and persuasion and is currently Regents Professor of Psychology at Arizona State University and president of a consultancy, Influence at Work, which works with corporate clients. Cialdini has also written Influence, Science and Practice, designed for teaching persuasion and compliance principles to groups. Chapter 11. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. The following are quotes from his 1996 book, Creativity. The real story of creativity is more difficult and strange than many overly optimistic accounts have claimed. For one thing, as I will try to show, an idea or product that deserves the label creative arises from the synergy of many sources, and not only from the mind of a single person. And a genuinely creative accomplishment is almost never the result of a sudden insight, a light bulb flashing on in the dark, but comes after years of hard work. Creativity is a central source of meaning in our lives for several reasons. First, most of the things that are interesting, important, and human are the results of creativity. We share 98% of our genetic makeup with chimpanzees. Without creativity, it would be difficult indeed to distinguish humans from apes. In a nutshell, real creativity can only emerge once we have mastered the medium or domain in which we work. Books in a similar vein. Edward de Bono's Lateral Thinking and Martin Seligman's Authentic Happiness. Before turning his mind to creativity, psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi wrote a celebrated book called Flow. Its insight was that it is a mistake to pursue happiness itself. Rather, we should recognize when we are genuinely happy, what we are doing when we feel powerful and true, and do more of those things. Flow activities we do for the sheer enjoyment or intellectual satisfaction, rather than to gain some intrinsic reward. You might want to win a game of chess, for instance, but you play it because it engages your mind totally. You might want to become a good dancer, but it is the learning and dancing that are the main reward. Csikszentmihalyi took these ideas and applied them to the question of how some people become genuinely creative. He was not interested in what he calls the small c creativity, involved in making a cake or choosing curtains or the imaginative talk of a child, but the kind that changes a whole domain or area of human endeavor. Truly creative people have a capacity to change the fundamental way we see, understand, appreciate, or do things, whether it is by inventing a new machine or writing a set of songs, and Csikszentmihalyi wanted to know what made them different. Creativity, flow, and the psychology of discovery and invention is the culmination of 30 years of work into creativity. There is a small industry of how to be more creative books and seminars, and many are glib, but this is one of the few serious treatments that understands the complexity of the creative person and process. Studying the creative. At the beginning of creativity, Csikszentmihalyi provides information on what he claims was the first systematic study of living creative people, involving interviews with 91 people considered to have had an outstanding impact on their domain, whether that was the arts, business, law, government, medicine, or science. The scientists encompassed 14 Nobel Prize winners. The names included Mortimer J. Adler, philosopher; John Bardeen, physicist; Kenneth Boulding, economist; Margaret Butler, mathematician; Subramanya Chandrasekhar, astrophysicist; Barry Commoner, biologist; Natalie Davis, historian; Yorgi Faludi, poet; Nadine Gordimer, writer; Stephen Jay Gould, paleontologist; Hazel Henderson, economist; Ellen Lanyon, artist; Ernst Mayr, zoologist; Brenda Milner, psychologist; Ilya Prigozhin, chemist; John Reed, banker; Jonas Salk, biologist; Ravi Shankar, musician; Benjamin Spock, pediatrician; and Eva Zeisel, ceramic designer. It is worth getting creativity just to read about these people, some of whom are outright famous and others who are known mainly within their own field. Nearly all the subjects are over 60, allowing Csikszentmihalyi a better chance to survey fully developed careers and elicit insights into the secrets of mature creative success. Creativity in context. Csikszentmihalyi suggests that the common idea of a creative individual coming up with great insights, discoveries, works, or inventions in isolation is wrong. Creativity results from a complex interaction between a person and their environment or culture, and also depends on timing. For instance, if the great Renaissance artists like Ghiberti or Michelangelo had been born only 50 years before they were, the culture of artistic patronage would not have been in place to fund or shape their great achievements. Consider also individual astronomers. Their discoveries could not have happened unless centuries of technological development of the telescope and evolving knowledge of the universe had come before them. Csikszentmihalyi's point is that we should devote as much attention to the development of a domain as we do to the people working within it, as only this can properly explain how advances are made. Individuals are only a link in a chain, a phase in a process, he notes. Did Einstein really invent the theory of relativity? Did Edison invent electricity? This is like saying that the spark is responsible for the fire, when of course fire involves many elements. The products of creativity also need to have a receptive audience to evaluate them. A creation vanishes if it is not recognized. Mimes are the cultural equivalent of genes, things such as language, customs, laws, songs, theories, and values. If they're strong, they survive. Otherwise, they are lost. Creative people seek to create mimes that can have an impact on their cultures. The greater the creator, the longer lasting and deeper the impact of the mimes. First, love your work. Creative breakthroughs never just come out of the blue. They are almost always the result of years of hard work and close attention to something. Many creative discoveries are lucky, particularly those of the scientific type, but usually the luck comes after years of detailed work in the area in which the discovery is made. Csikszentmihalyi tells of the astronomer Vera Rubin, who discovered that stars in some galaxies do not all rotate in the same direction. Some go clockwise, others anti-clockwise. She would not have made the discovery if she had not had access to a new type of clearer spectral analysis, and this access came from her already being known for her substantial contributions to the field. Rubin was not out to make a big discovery. Rather, it was the result of close observation of stars and a love of her work. Her goal was to record data, but it was her dedication that yielded the surprising findings. Truly creative people work for work's own sake, and if they make a public discovery or become famous, that is a bonus. What drives them, more than rewards, is the desire to find or create order where there was none before. Be a master before a creator. A popular image of the creative person is their defiance of all norms, dogma, and customs. This gives the wrong impression, however, as everyone who creates genuine change has first needed to master their domain, which means soaking up and mastering its skills and knowledge. It is only later, having mastered their domain, that people can truly make a creative mark, as incorporation of the rules of the domain allows those rules to be bent or broken to create something new. In short, to do new things, you first have to have done the old things well. Common creative features. Csikszentmihalyi's other insights include: the idea of the tortured creative person is largely a myth. Most of his respondents were very happy with their lives and their creative output. Successful creative people tend to have two things in abundance: curiosity and drive. They are absolutely fascinated by their subject, and while others may be more brilliant, their sheer desire for accomplishment is the decisive factor. Creative people take their intuition seriously, looking for patterns where others see confusion, and are able to make connections between discrete areas of knowledge. Creative people are often seen as arrogant, but this is usually because they want to devote most of their attention to their exciting work. Though creative people can be creative anywhere, they gravitate to centers where their interests can be satisfied more easily, where they can meet like-minded people, and where their work can be appreciated. Beautiful or inspiring environments are better at helping people to be more creative thinkers than giving them a seminar on creativity. School does not seem to have had a great effect on many famous, creative people, and even in college they were often not stars. Many people later considered geniuses were not particularly remarkable as children. What they always had more than others was curiosity. Many creative achievers were either orphaned or had little contact with their father. On the other hand, they frequently had a very involved, loving mother who expected a lot from them. Most fell into one of two family categories. They were poor or disadvantaged, but their parents nevertheless pushed them to educational or career attainment. Or they grew up in families of intellectuals, researchers, professionals, writers, musicians, and so on. Only 10% were middle class. The lesson? To be a powerfully creative adult, it is best to be brought up in a family that values intellectual endeavor, not one that celebrates middle-class comfort. The creative are both humble and proud, with a selfless devotion to their domain and what might be achieved, yet also confidence that they have much to contribute and will make their mark. And finally, it is a myth that there is one creative personality. Something all creative people seem to share is complexity. They tend to bring the entire range of human possibilities within themselves. Final comments. Csikszentmihalyi says that it would be too easy to see creative people as a privileged elite. Rather, their lives are a message that we should all be able to find work that is fulfilling and that we love. As he notes, most of the people in the study did not come from privileged backgrounds, but had to struggle to do what they wanted in the face of economic or family pressures. Some of the respondents felt that their greatest achievement, in fact, was having created their own lives or careers without recourse to social expectation. So why should we really care about creativity? Csikszentmihalyi's work on the flow experience found that it occurs most readily when people are engaged in designing or discovering something new. We are happiest when we are being creative because we lose our sense of self and get the feeling that we are part of something greater. We are actually programmed to get satisfaction and pleasure from discovery and creativity, he says, because its results lead to our survival as a species. New ideas are needed more than ever if the planet is going to survive, and the best ones are likely to come from genuinely creative people. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi was born in 1934 in Fiume on the Adriatic, and his father was the Hungarian consul of what was then an Italian city. His family name means Saint Michael from the province of Czech, Czech being originally a Hungarian province. Csikszentmihalyi spent his adolescence in Rome, helping to run the family restaurant while receiving a classical education. After graduating, he worked as a photographer and travel agent. He enrolled at the University of Chicago in 1958, where he received a B.A. and Ph.D. Though he was more interested in the ideas of Carl Jung, he was required to study behaviorist psychology, and only later during his years as a professor at Chicago was he able to develop his theories on flow, creativity, and the self. Since 1999, Csikszentmihalyi has been a professor at Claremont Graduate University in California, where his Quality of Life Research Center explores aspects of positive psychology. Other books include Beyond Boredom and Anxiety, 1975, The Evolving Self, A Psychology for the Third Millennium, 1993, and Finding Flow, The Psychology of Engagement with Everyday Life, 1997. Chapter 12. Albert Ellis and Robert A. Harper. The following are quotes from their 1961 book, A Guide to Rational Living. You can never expect to be deliriously happy at all times in life. Freedom from all physical pain is never likely to be your lot, but an extraordinary lack of mental and emotional woe may be yours if you think that it may be and work for what you believe in. Man is a uniquely language-creating animal, and he begins to learn from very early childhood to formulate his thoughts, perceptions, and feelings in words, phrases, and sentences. If this is so, and we know of no evidence to the contrary, then for all practical purposes, the phrases and sentences that we keep telling ourselves usually are or become our thoughts and emotions. In a nutshell, if we know how we generate negative emotions through particular thoughts, especially irrational ones, we have the secret to never being desperately unhappy again. Books in a similar vein: Nathaniel Branden's The Psychology of Self-Esteem, David D. Burns' Feeling Good, and Martin Seligman's Authentic Happiness. A Guide to Rational Living is one of the most enduring books in the popular psychology literature, selling over 1 million copies. Since it was published over 40 years ago, thousands of inspirational titles have come and gone, but it continues to change people's lives. The book brought to public attention a new form of psychology, rational emotive therapy, RET, that went against decades of orthodox Freudian psychoanalysis and sparked a revolution in psychology. RET says that emotions do not arise as a result of repressed desires and needs, as Freud insisted, but directly from our thoughts, ideas, attitudes, and beliefs. It is not the mysterious unconscious that matters most to our psychological health, but the humdrum statements we say to ourselves on a daily basis. Added up, these represent our philosophy of life, one that can quite easily be altered if we are willing to change what we habitually say to ourselves. Reasoning your way out of emotional tangles seems doubtful, but Ellis's pioneering ideas and 4 decades of cognitive psychology have shown that the theory does indeed work. Watching our internal sentences. Human beings, Ellis and Harper note, are language-creating animals. We tend to formulate our emotions and our ideas in terms of words and sentences. These effectively become our thoughts and emotions. Therefore, if we are basically the things we tell ourselves, any type of personal change requires us to look first at our internal conversations. Do they serve us or undermine us? Talk therapy aims to reveal the errors in logic that people believe to be true. If, for instance, we are having terrible feelings of anxiety or fear, we are asked to track back to the original thought in the sequence of thoughts that led to our current anxiety. We invariably find that we are saying things to ourselves such as, "Wouldn't it be terrible if," or "Isn't it horrible that I am?" It is at this point that we have to intervene and ask ourselves why exactly it would be so terrible if such and such happened, or whether our current situation is really as bad as we say. And even if it is, will it last forever? This sort of self-questioning at first seems naive, but by doing it we begin to see just how much our internal sentences shape our life. After all, if we label some event a catastrophe, it surely will become one. We can only live up to our internal statements, whether they make something good, bad, or neutral. Never being desperately unhappy again. How is it that human beings have conquered space and the atom, but most of us can't get ourselves out of bad moods? As we have advanced materially, it seems that the level of neurosis and psychosis in society has also risen. The main challenge for people today is gaining control over their emotional lives. In a chapter titled The Art of Never Being Desperately Unhappy, Ellis and Harper argue that misery and depression are always states of mind, since they are self-perpetuated. When we are dejected after the loss of a relationship or a job, for instance, this is quite understandable. However, if we allow the feeling to linger, it builds strength. Things snowball so that we become miserable with our own misery, instead of trying to see the situation rationally. A Guide to Rational Living notes that it is virtually impossible to sustain an emotional outburst without bolstering it by repeated ideas. Something will remain bad in our mind only as long as we tell ourselves it is. If we do not keep creating the bad feeling, how can it possibly endure? Granted, if we are experiencing physical pain, we cannot simply ignore it, But once it is over, there is no automatic link between stimulus and feeling. Even in the 1960s, Ellis was saying that drugs were problematic in treating depression because once a person stopped taking them, they tended to become depressed again. Permanent change required them to actually change their thinking so that they could talk themselves out of persistent negative feelings whenever they surfaced. He shrewdly observed that some people secretly enjoy being depressed because they don't have to take any action to change. In some cases, we have to decide that we will not be depressed, and our feelings alter accordingly. Final comments. Are human beings rational or irrational? We are both, Ellis and Harper say. We are brainy, but we still go in for puerile, idiotic, prejudiced, and selfish behavior anyway. The key to a good life is applying rationality to the most irrational sphere of our life, the emotions. In the emphasis on disciplining our own thinking and finding a middle way between extreme emotions, there are some definite echoes of Buddhism in the rational emotive approach. It acknowledges that whatever happened in our past, it is the present that matters, and what we can do now to alleviate it. Ellis discovered this himself as a boy. With a troubled, bipolar-affected mother, and a father often away on business trips, he took responsibility for his younger siblings, making sure they got dressed and off to school each day. When he was hospitalized with kidney problems, his parents rarely visited him. Ellis learned that we don't have to get upset by situations unless we allow ourselves to be, that there is always room for control of our reactions. While his brand of therapy may seem hard-nosed, in fact it represents a very optimistic view of people. A guide to rational living helps anyone to understand how their emotions are generated, and, crucially, how a reasonably happy and productive life can be yours through more care and discipline in your thinking. Its topics include lessening the need for approval, conquering anxiety, how to be happy though frustrated, and eradicating fear of failure. Consistent with its content, the book has a wonderfully clear and straightforward style. Get the updated and revised 3rd edition, which contains a new chapter on research supporting the principles behind and the techniques of RET. Albert Ellis. Born in 1913 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Ellis was raised in New York City. He gained a business degree at the City University of New York and unsuccessfully attempted a career in business. He also tried and failed to become a novelist. Having written some articles on human sexuality, in 1942 Ellis entered the clinical psychology program at Columbia University. On obtaining his master's degree in 1943, he launched a part-time private practice in family and sex counseling, and in 1947 earned his doctorate. He held positions at Rutgers and New York University and as a senior clinical psychologist at the Northern New Jersey Mental Hygiene Clinic. Ellis's ideas were slow to be accepted by the American psychological establishment, but today he is considered, along with Aaron Beck, to be the father of cognitive behavior therapy. The Institute for Rational Emotive Therapy, founded in 1959, continues to disseminate his ideas. See also the biography The Lives of Albert Ellis by Emmett Velton. Ellis was the author of more than 600 academic papers, and his 50-plus books include How to Live with a Neurotic, The Art and Science of Love, Sex Without Guilt, The Art and Science of Rational Eating, and How to Make Yourself Stubbornly Refuse to be Miserable About Anything. Yes, anything. Robert A. Harper is a former president of the American Association of Marriage Counselors and the American Academy of Psychotherapists. He has a Ph.D. from Ohio State University and since 1953 has been in private practice in Washington, D.C. Other books include Creative Marriage, co-authored with Albert Ellis, and 45 Levels to Sexual Understanding and Enjoyment, co-authored with Walter Stokes. Chapter 13. Sidney Rosen. The following are quotes from his 1982 book, My Voice Will Go With You, The Teaching Tales of Milton Erickson. If one reads these stories in the so-called waking state, one might dismiss them as being cliched, corny, or of interest but not enlightening. Yet, in the hypnotic state, where everything that is said by the therapist is heightened by meaning, a story or a single word in a story may trigger a mini satari, the Zen term for enlightenment. Sidney Rosen. It is really amazing what people can do, only they don't know what they can do. Milton Erickson. In a nutshell, the unconscious mind is a well of wise solutions and forgotten personal power. Books in a similar vein: Robert Cialdini's Influence, Sigmund Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, Carl Jung's The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, Fritz Perls' Gestalt Therapy, and Carl Rogers' On Becoming a Person. Sigmund Freud experimented with hypnosis but could never induce trances easily or get patients to accept his suggestions. Milton Erickson, born 45 years after Freud, in many ways fulfilled the potential of hypnosis and made it into a bona fide psychological tool, which can often bring about instant changes in people who have labored with complexes and phobias for years. Perhaps the answer to why Freud failed and Erickson so brilliantly succeeded can be found in the dynamics of the psychotherapeutic relationship. Conventionally, because doctors have the knowledge, they are the healers. The patients, in their ignorance, are the ones to be healed. As a young doctor in mental institutions, Erickson inherited this understanding, but later began to comprehend the relationship as simply two people working together to tap their unconscious minds for solutions. By going into a trance himself, Erickson's voice would become the patient's voice. "My voice will go with you," he would tell them, so creating a great power of suggestion. The Erickson Way. Erickson's secret was his teaching tales. Not old fairy tales, but anecdotes about his own family life, or the cases of previous patients that carried with them special meaning for a person's problem. They usually involved an element of shock or surprise, and were designed to provoke an aha moment that allowed the person to get outside the normal circularity of their thoughts. Instead of saying, "I see what's wrong, this is what you should do," Erickson would let patients glean the message from the anecdote, as if they had figured it out on their own. An alcoholic who came to Erickson seemed a hopeless case. His parents were alcoholics. His grandparents on both sides were drinkers. Even his wife and brother were alcoholics. Erickson could have sent him to Alcoholics Anonymous, but given the man's environment — he worked on a newspaper, which he said encouraged a hard-drinking lifestyle — Erickson thought he would try something different. He asked the man to go to the local botanical gardens and just sit and contemplate the cactus plants, which could go for 3 years without water and not die. Many years later, the man's daughter contacted Erickson and told him that after the cactus treatment, both her father and her mother had stayed sober. The image of a flourishing cactus needing little drink had obviously been a powerful one. Erickson admitted that this treatment would not have been found in a textbook, but that was the point of his style of therapy. We are all different, and we respond to the cure that means most to us. Sometimes his tales seem more like Zen koans or riddles, not making perfect sense. When you hear them in a normal state, you may consider they are corny or think, "So what?" But in a trance, the loaded language, meaningful pauses, and element of surprise can jolt a sudden connection with the unconscious mind that triggers change. Erickson gave psychiatrist Sidney Rosen permission to collate many of his tales and put them into a book with commentary. Though over 20 years old now, My Voice Will Go With You is a perfect introduction to Erickson, capturing his magic and unique contribution to psychology. Here is a brief look at a handful of tales and an interpretation of their meaning, but it is worth getting the actual book for the rest. Establishing rapport. When working with patients, rather than trying to find out a lot of background history, Erickson's priority was to establish rapport. He became very aware of how a person responded to a tale in terms of body language, breathing, and small facial cues. One summer, Erikson was selling books door to door to help pay for his college tuition. He visited a farmer, but the farmer wasn't interested in books. He was only concerned with raising his hogs. Giving up trying to sell anything, Erikson began scratching the hogs' backs. Having grown up on a farm himself, he knew they liked this. The farmer noticed and was pleased, saying, "Anyone who likes hogs and knows how to scratch their backs is someone I want to know." He asked the young Erikson to stay for supper, and then agreed to buy his books. Erikson told the story to show that everything about us communicates something. We cannot not communicate. When we need to make judgments, just as the farmer did, we have to let our subconscious minds have a role. Feelings or hunches are usually correct, and we must take in the whole situation. Mirroring. A related technique is mirroring. By going along with what a patient was saying, Erikson could make them see more objectively how they were acting. In a hospital where he worked, there were two men claiming to be Jesus Christ. He made them sit on a bench and talk to each other. Eventually, by seeing the idiocy of the other person's claims, each was able to see the silliness of their own. When a hospital was building a new wing, Erikson got another Jesus to help out with the carpentry, knowing that the man could not deny that Jesus was famously a carpenter before emerging as the Messiah. This unusual remedy got the man engaged with reality and other people again. Ruth was a beautiful 12-year-old girl with a great personality. People did things for her because they liked her so much. However, she was apt to suddenly kick people in the shins, tear their clothes, or stamp on their foot and break their toes. One day Erikson heard that she was on a rampage in a ward. When he got there, she was tearing plaster off walls, but he didn't tell her to stop. He began trashing the surroundings himself, tearing sheets off beds and breaking windows. "Let's go somewhere else," he said. "This is fun," and he went into the corridor. When he saw a nurse, he ripped her clothes off, revealing only her bra and panties. At this, Ruth said, "Dr. Erikson, you shouldn't do a thing like that," and brought a sheet to the nurse to cover her up. With her own behavior revealed to her, she became a good girl. The nurse, who happened to be in the corridor, had agreed to be part of the scene. Indirect logic. Often, when someone came to Erikson with a control or addiction problem, he would not tell them to stop doing whatever they were doing, but to go on doing it more intensely. When a man came to him who wanted to lose weight and stop smoking and drinking, he did not tell him to cease any of these things. Instead, he ordered him to buy his food, cigarettes, and alcohol not from the local shops, but from shops at least a mile away, so that frequent exercise would lead him to reconsider his habits. A woman came to Erikson who weighed 180 pounds and wanted to weigh 130 pounds. She was stuck in a pattern of gaining, then losing weight. Erikson said he would help her if she first made a promise. She agreed, and he told her to first gain weight until she reached 200 pounds. She fought against this, but once she had reached 200 pounds, she was so desperate to be allowed to lose weight that she went down to 130 pounds without difficulty. These examples of Erikson's indirect logic reveal his larger philosophy. You can only really get a person to change when they feel they own the change. Compared to coercion or instruction, change will always be more powerful and lasting this way. Reframing. A woman came to see Erikson who hated living in Phoenix, Arizona. Her husband wanted to go on holiday to Flagstaff, another city in Arizona. But she said she felt better staying in Phoenix and hating it than she did going elsewhere for relief. Erikson made her curious about why she hated Phoenix so much, and why she punished herself with her thoughts. During a hypnosis session, he told her to go to Flagstaff and watch for a flash of color. He secretly had nothing in mind he wanted her to see, but it made the woman curious, and when she found her flash of color, a red bird against a green background, she was elated. Erikson wanted to change her mindset so that she would begin to see things she didn't normally see, in a deeper sense, in addition to the physical faculty of vision. The woman ended up spending a month in Flagstaff, and thereafter went on vacations in different parts of America, looking for the flash of color that provided meaning. In 1 or 2 sessions, Erikson had facilitated a change from strong negative feeling to life-affirming curiosity. The wisdom within. If there is one thing that can be drawn from Erikson's work, it is that inside each of us there is something which knows. He believed that every person had a healthy, powerful core, and that hypnosis was a useful tool in allowing this self to guide us again. He illustrated this in an anecdote from his boyhood. One day a horse wandered onto the family property, and they didn't know whose it was. It had no marks. Milton decided to mount the horse and take it back to the road, but instead of riding it different places to find the owner, he let the horse guide him. When the horse walked back to its owner's property, they asked how he knew it was theirs. He replied, "I didn't know, but the horse knew. All I did was keep him on the road." The horse is, of course, the unconscious mind, which, if accessed in a trance state, can solve any problem and return us to our true, powerful self. Erikson believed that most of our limitations are self-imposed, but that the barriers are mainly put up by our conscious mind. By accessing and reshaping the contents of our unconscious, we can reshape our lives. It is up to us to reprogram ourselves with information that is a better approximation of reality, not to be stuck with negative or twisted thought patterns. Final comments. Erikson's ability to pick up on tiny cues in a person's facial movements and body language often caused people to believe he was psychic. When he contracted polio at 17, he could hardly move, and with nothing else to do, he began watching and analyzing the behavior of his numerous siblings. He noticed that sometimes when they said one thing, they meant another, and that communication involved a lot more than merely speech. His famous ability to read people had begun. If you have ever gone to a hypnotist to stop smoking, lose weight, or be cured of a phobia, you are evidence that hypnosis is now respectable, and this is part of Erikson's legacy. His idea of brief therapy, that change can happen in an instant, instead of a patient spending years in psychoanalysis, is also now a part of the psychotherapeutic landscape. In addition, his followers, Richard Bandler and John Grinder, went on to create neurolinguistic programming, NLP, a more codified version of Eriksonian techniques that has been taken up by business and personal coaches to provide an edge at work. Yet as Rosen shows, Erikson was hardly technological in his approach. He recognized human beings as a storytelling species. A tale, myth, or anecdote is always the most effective way to express insights about life and personal transformation. Milton Erikson. Born in Orem, Nevada in 1901, Erikson was colorblind, tone-deaf, and dyslexic. When he was young, his family traveled in a covered wagon to Wisconsin, where they established a farm. Erikson studied psychology at the University of Wisconsin, where he learned how to hypnotize people. He gained his medical degree through the Colorado General Hospital and worked as a junior psychiatrist at Rhode Island State Hospital. From 1930 to 1934, he was at Worcester State Hospital, becoming chief psychiatrist, followed by clinical and teaching appointments in Michigan. There he married Elizabeth Erikson. They had 5 children, in addition to 3 he had in a previous marriage. In 1948, Erikson moved to Phoenix for health reasons, where his miracle cures brought people to him from across America. He hypnotized writer Aldous Huxley and counted among his friends anthropologist Margaret Mead and philosopher Gregory Bateson. He was founder of the American Society of Clinical Hypnosis and a fellow of the American Psychological and Psychiatric Associations. Erikson died in 1980. His ashes were scattered on Squaw Peak in Phoenix, which he had often ordered patients to climb as part of their treatment. Sidney Rosen is assistant clinical professor in the psychiatric department of the New York University Medical Center. He has presented workshops on Eriksonian techniques and wrote the foreword to Erikson's Hypnotherapy, an exploratory casebook, 1979. Written with Ernest L. Rossi. Chapter 14. Erik Erikson. The following are quotes from his 1958 book, Young Man Luther. I have called the major crisis of adolescence the identity crisis. It occurs in that period of the life cycle when each youth must forge for himself some central perspective and direction, some working unity out of the effective remnants of his childhood and the hopes of his anticipated adulthood. No doubt when Martin learned to speak up, much of what he had to say to the devil was fueled by a highly compressed store of defiance, consisting of what he had been unable to say to his father and to his teachers. In due time he said it all, with a vengeance, to the Pope. In a nutshell, crises of identity, while painful at the time, are necessary to forge a stronger, more commanding self. Books in a similar vein. Nathaniel Branden's The Psychology of Self-Esteem. William James, The Principles of Psychology. And Gail Sheehy's Passages. If you have ever talked about having an identity crisis, you have psychologist Erik Erikson to thank for inventing the term. Erikson's focus on identity was shaped by his own background. The product of a brief affair between his married Jewish mother, Carla Abrahamson, and an unidentified Danish man, he grew up in Germany as Erich Homburger, taking the surname of his physician stepfather. At school he was teased for being Jewish, while at the synagogue he was pilloried for his Nordic god appearance. He was tall, blond, and blue-eyed. When three half-sisters came along, this only intensified his feeling of being an outsider. In his late 30s, on taking up U.S. citizenship, Erich Homburger changed his surname to Erikson, that is, son of himself. While Erikson paid particular attention to the formation of identity in adolescence, his great contribution was to note that the question, "Who am I?" will raise itself many times over the course of an average person's lifetime. Freud identified 5 stages of psychological development, from infancy to the teenage years. But Erikson went further to cover the whole life cycle, with 8 psychosocial stages, from birth to old age. As one stage ends, we experience a crisis when our identity comes into question, and at these points we can choose either growth or stagnation. Each choice, he said, lays another cornerstone in the structure of the adult personality. In fully appreciating the intensity of these turning points, he shattered the myth that life after we turn 20 is one long, flat line of stability. Erikson is famous for another reason. Although Freud had written a celebrated study of Leonardo da Vinci, it was Erikson's books on Gandhi and Martin Luther that established a new genre: psychobiography, or the application of psychological analysis to famous people's lives. In Luther he found an example of identity crisis par excellence, described in Young Man Luther, a study in psychoanalysis and history. The Luther story in brief. The Christian Europe of Luther's childhood and adolescence was preoccupied with the Last Judgment, a final accounting of one's life in which all sins would be balanced against the good. People lived in fear of going to hell and prayed relentlessly for the souls of those who had died. Public torture of criminals was common, as were caning and whipping children in school. The theme of life was total obedience, to one's elders, to the church, to God. In this world mood of guilt and sadness, as Erikson described it, Martin Luther was born in 1483. His father came from peasant stock, but through hard work became a small-scale capitalist with an ownership stake in a mine. Hans Luther created a nest egg for his son's education, intending him to become a high-ranking lawyer who would vault the family out of its humble origins. Martin Luther duly went to Latin school and did well, and at 17 entered university. In 1505 he graduated and enrolled in law school. However, while at home for the summer break, he was almost struck by lightning during a thunderstorm. Already having misgivings about the life path laid out for him, he took the event as a sign, and vowed to become a monk. His parents were devastated, but in 1510 he entered the Augustinian monastery at Erfurt. At first all went well, as he enjoyed the holy atmosphere of the monastery. Nevertheless, like any young man, he was tempted by sexual thoughts and consumed by guilt over them. As the many Luther biographers tell the story, he had some kind of panic attack in the choir of his monastery church, crying out, "I am not." Erickson saw the event as indicating a classic identity crisis. Luther had left behind the secular career, not to mention marriage, his father had so wanted him to follow. Yet now, after a promising, godly beginning, the monastery path seemed wrong as well, despite his desperate efforts to cling to his vows. He was caught in a terrible no-man's land of identity. Whatever he thought he was, it was painfully clear he was not. Yet Martin stayed with the church, ascending quickly. He became a doctor of theology and by 1515 was a vicar in charge of 11 monasteries. All the time, though, a gap was growing between his understanding of genuine spiritual faith and his perception of the church. According to medieval Catholic doctrine, sins required some kind of worldly punishment, which could be alleviated by doing good works. But even this responsibility could be sidestepped by the purchase of indulgences, pieces of paper sold by the church that poured money into its coffers. Even this issue was just the tip of the iceberg for Luther. Quite radically, he had come to the belief that the authority of the Bible, the Word, was far more important than the authority of an institution. Things came to a head when, in October 1517, he nailed a document, the famous 95 Theses, to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg, a usual place for posting public notices. Outlining the areas where the church had to reform, the document was a bombshell, but might never have had the impact it did were it not for the recent invention of the printing press, which enabled this and Luther's later writings to be spread far and wide. Anyone, from peasant to prince, who had a gripe with the status quo now had a focus. Luther became a celebrity, and his rebellion sparked off the Protestant Reformation. Erickson's interpretation. Rebellion is usually manifested in one's younger years, but Luther was 34 by the time he properly spoke out against the church. Erickson's explanation was that young people must first believe in something intensely before they turn against it, and Luther was desperate to believe in the church's divine authority. He may never have become its most vocal critic if he had not first gone through the experience of complete devotion and attachment. Erickson commented that great figures in history often spend years in a passive state. From a young age, they feel that they will create a big stamp on the world, but unconsciously they wait for their particular truth to form itself in their minds, until they can make the most impact at the right time. This was the case with Luther. Erickson gave a great deal of space to a psychoanalytical discussion of Luther's relationship with his father. He surmised that Luther's courage in standing up to the Holy Roman Church can only be understood in the context of his initial disobedience to his father. Perhaps, surprisingly, Erickson suggested that Luther was not rebellious by nature, but having once defied the major figure in his life, this put him on a trajectory of disobedience. Erickson's most intriguing point was that Luther did change the world via his theological position, but that position was the result of working out his own personal demons and identity crises. Was he Luther the good monk, Luther the good son, or Luther the great reformer? Erickson likened major identity crises to a second birth, an idea that he got from William James. While once-born people rather painlessly fit themselves and are fitted into the ideology of their age, twice-born people are often tortured souls who seek healing in some total conversion experience that will give them direction. The positive aspect of the twice-born is that if they do successfully transform themselves, they have the potential to sweep the world along with them. It took a while for Luther to work out who he was, but once he had done so, not even the Pope could stop him.